A flight attendant rips up a black girl's ticket, assuming she doesn't belong in first class. What she doesn't realize is that the girl's father owns the airline. After a single phone call, the situation takes a shocking turn. The flight attendant is left speechless as her mistake comes to light, facing serious consequences. Meanwhile, the girl regains her dignity, proving that assumptions can have unexpected consequences. The hushed luxury of first class was interrupted by a sharp, dismissive voice. "This must be a mistake," the flight attendant scoffed, her eyes narrowing at the young black girl in seat 2A. Maya Carter, 16 years old, bright, confident, and excited for her first solo flight, had barely settled into her seat when she felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her. Before she could respond, the flight attendant grabbed her ticket and, in one swift motion, tore it in half. The tiny pieces fluttered to the floor like falling leaves. "I don't know how you got this ticket, but first class isn't open to just anyone," she said, her tone firm and unwavering. The entire cabin fell silent. Nearby, passengers exchanged uneasy glances, some turning their heads to avoid getting involved. Others watched, intrigued but unwilling to speak up. Maya's hands tightened into fists on her lap, but she took a deep breath, her father's words echoing in her mind. "Never let people define you by their assumptions. Let them define themselves by how they treat you." The flight attendant thought she was just another passenger, someone easy to dismiss. But what she didn't know was that Maya wasn't just anyone, and she was about to regret her mistake. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more powerful real-life inspired stories. A young girl humiliated, a power-hungry flight attendant, and an act of injustice that will soon be turned upside down. This is a story about what happens when people judge too quickly, and how karma has a way of striking back. Maya Carter walked onto the plane with quiet excitement, her carry-on slung over her shoulder as she scanned the elegant first-class cabin. It was her first time flying alone, and though she had flown first class before with her parents, this time felt different. No one knew who she was. No one knew that her father was James Carter, the CEO of this very airline. She moved through the cabin, her sneakers silent against the plush carpeting. First class was everything she had imagined. Spacious reclining seats, dimmed ambient lighting, and an air of quiet sophistication. Most of the passengers were already seated. Business executives in crisp suits, a woman flipping through a financial magazine, a man adjusting his gold watch. Everyone fit the mold of what first-class passengers were expected to look like. Maya felt a flicker of self-consciousness as she reached her seat. 2A, a window seat near the front. She wasn't dressed like the others. She wore a simple pair of jeans, a comfortable sweater, and clean sneakers. She had chosen comfort over luxury, but now she felt the weight of a few lingering glances as she placed her bag in the overhead compartment. Just as she sat down and exhaled, relieved to have made it to her seat without any issues, she felt a pair of eyes on her. Brenda Mills, one of the senior flight attendants, stood a few feet away, clipboard in hand, her sharp gaze locked onto Maya. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, her blonde hair neatly pinned up, and her expression unreadable, but calculating. Brenda had been working in first class for years, and she took her job seriously. Too seriously. To her, first class wasn't just about luxury. It was about order. And order meant making sure that first class remained the way it was supposed to be. The moment she saw Maya sitting in 2A, something in her stiffened. A young black girl, alone, dressed in casual clothes? That wasn't normal for first class. Brenda had seen people try to sneak into first class before. Overconfident college kids, tourists hoping to get away with an upgrade. She had no doubt this was one of those situations. She narrowed her eyes as she walked toward Maya's seat. Maya, completely unaware of the assumption forming in Brenda's mind, reached for her phone. She had just settled in, ready to text her dad that she had boarded safely, when a shadow fell over her. She looked up to see Brenda standing over her, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. "Excuse me," Brenda said, her voice clipped and professional, but already dismissive. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Maya blinked, caught off guard. "Yes, I'm in 2A. She reached for her ticket to show her. Brenda, barely, glanced at the ticket before shaking her head. "I think you're confused. First class isn't open to just anyone." Maya felt her stomach tighten. Something about the way Brenda said that, just anyone, didn't sit right with her. She opened her mouth to respond, but Brenda was already reaching for her ticket, and before Maya could even react, Brenda tore it in half. The sound of paper ripping was shockingly loud in the otherwise quiet cabin. Nearby, passengers looked up, some whispering, others pretending not to notice. Maya felt her face heat up, a mix of embarrassment and anger bubbling inside her. Brenda sighed dramatically, shaking her head. "I don't know how you got this ticket, but you need to move. Now." Maya clenched her jaw, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She had never been in a situation like this before. She had never been treated like she didn't belong. Brenda had already decided Maya was a problem before even looking at the facts. But what Brenda didn't know, what she was about to find out in the most humiliating way possible, was that Maya was far from just another passenger. She reached for her phone, her fingers steady as she scrolled through her contacts. One call, that's all it would take. Maya leaned back into the plush leather seat, her heart fluttering with excitement. She had traveled first class before, but this was her first time flying alone, a milestone that made her feel both independent and grown up. Slipping in her earbuds, she let soft music fill her ears as she gazed out the large window, watching the busy airport outside. As she scrolled through her phone, she noticed a few lingering glances from nearby passengers. A well-dressed older man across the aisle raised an eyebrow, barely hiding his skepticism. A woman in business attire looked at her for a moment before quickly shifting her gaze elsewhere. Maya could feel the silent questions behind their stares. She wasn't dressed like the typical first-class passenger. Her comfortable jeans, sweater, and sneakers stood out in a sea of tailored suits and designer handbags. But she was used to ignoring that kind of attention, and she shrugged it off as she prepared to text her father that she had boarded safely. Just as she was about to type, a shadow fell over her. She looked up to see a middle-aged flight attendant standing in the aisle beside her. The woman's uniform was crisp, her posture rigid, and her expression unreadable but clearly disapproving. "Miss," the woman said sharply, "I think you're in the wrong section. Coach is in the back." Maya blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the immediate hostility in her tone. She reached into her bag and pulled out her first-class ticket, handing it over. "No, I'm in 2A," she replied politely. The flight attendant took the ticket but barely glanced at it before shaking her head. "I don't know how you got this," she scoffed, her lips curling slightly, "but you need to move." Maya felt her stomach tighten. There was something more behind those words, something more than just a seating mistake. She sat up straighter, her voice calm but firm. "This is my seat. I paid for it." The flight attendant sighed, as if she were dealing with a troublesome child. "Young lady, I don't have time for this. People like you don't just buy first-class tickets." The words landed like a slap. A ripple of unease spread through the cabin. A businessman lowered his newspaper, his eyes flicking toward them. A woman in the row behind Maya bit her lip, shifting in her seat as if debating whether to speak up. But no one did. The tension in the air thickened. Maya felt heat rising in her chest, but she forced herself to remain composed. She had always been taught to handle situations with grace, even when others did not. "Check your system," Maya said evenly. "You'll see my name on the passenger list." The flight attendant, whose name tag read Brenda Mills, rolled her eyes. "No," she snapped. "I won't check anything." Before Maya could say another word, Brenda took the ticket in her hand and, in one swift motion, tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper cut through the quiet hum of the cabin. Maya sat frozen, her mouth slightly open in shock. The torn pieces of her ticket fluttered onto her lap, landing like an insult made physical. A murmur rippled through the cabin. Some passengers exchanged uneasy glances, their discomfort evident. Others pretended not to notice, choosing silence over confrontation. A few whispered amongst themselves, their voices hushed but filled with curiosity. Maya's fingers curled into fists on her lap. Her pulse pounded in her ears. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was humiliation. Brenda smoothed down, her uniform, clearly satisfied with herself. "Now, take your things and move before I have security escort you out." Maya's breath was shaky, but not from fear. From anger. She had never been treated like this before. Not in school. Not in any store. And certainly not on an airline that belonged to her father. Brenda had no idea who she was. Taking a slow, deep breath, Maya reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and scrolled through her contacts. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with controlled fury. She brought the phone to her ear and spoke calmly but with certainty. "I think I need to make a call." Maya gripped her phone tightly, her heart pounding. Not from fear, but from the quiet certainty that everything was about to change. The anger bubbling inside her wasn't loud or reckless. It was steady, measured, and controlled. She had been humiliated in front of an entire first-class cabin, treated as if she didn't belong, but now it was time to remind them who she was. She scrolled through her contacts and tapped the number she knew by heart. As the call rang, Brenda scoffed, crossing her arms with an amused smirk. "Oh, please," Brenda muttered, shaking her head. "Who exactly do you think is going to help? You? Your mother?" Maya didn't react. She simply held the phone to her ear, her expression unreadable. A few passengers shifted in their seats, watching the scene unfold with growing curiosity. One man leaned over to his seatmate. "Who's she calling?" he whispered. Another passenger, a woman in her 40s, quietly took out her phone and began recording. The air in the cabin was thick with tension, a mix of unease and anticipation. Then, the call connected. Maya! Her father's voice was deep, steady, and filled with immediate concern. "What's wrong?" Maya inhaled sharply, keeping her voice level but firm. "Dad, I'm on the flight, but there's a problem," she said. She could feel Brenda still hovering over her, her presence thick with arrogance. James Carter was silent for a moment. Then his voice sharpened. "What kind of problem?" Maya's jaw tightened. "One of your flight attendants just ripped up my ticket," she said slowly. "She assumed I didn't belong in first class. She refused to check the system, refused to believe me, and told me to move to coach." The other passengers were completely silent now, eyes darting between Maya and Brenda, waiting for the next move. The woman recording adjusted her angle, capturing everything. On the other end of the line, Maya could hear her father exhale sharply. There was a long pause. Then he spoke again. "Put her on the phone." Brenda's smirk finally faltered. Maya lifted her eyes to the flight attendant holding out the phone. "He wants to talk to you," she said simply. Brenda hesitated. For the first time, there was uncertainty in her stance. "I don't have time for—" she started, waving a dismissive hand, but Maya didn't move. "I think you should take this call," Maya said, her tone calm but pointed. Passengers exchanged looks. They could feel it now. Something was happening. A man in the row across the aisle leaned closer, whispering, "Who's on the phone?" The woman recording murmured under her breath, "Oh, this is about to get good." Brenda, still under the impression that this was some sort of bluff, let out a huff and snatched the phone from Maya's hand. "Hello," she said, her voice sharp and irritated. The moment the voice on the other end spoke, everything changed. "This is James Carter, CEO of the airline you're working for." Silence. Complete and utter silence. Brenda's face lost all color. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The confidence, the smug attitude, the sharp tone, all of it vanished. In an instant. The other passengers stared, shocked into stillness. One man gasped audibly. The woman recording let out a low whistle. Damn. Brenda's hands began to tremble slightly as she held the phone. She tried to clear her throat, but it came out dry and weak. Mr. Carter, sir," she stammered, her voice nothing like the authoritative, dismissive tone she had used just moments ago. There must have been a misunderstanding." Passengers exchanged glances, some murmuring in amusement. A few people started clapping quietly, unable to contain their enjoyment. Brenda closed her eyes for a moment, as if hoping she could undo what had just happened. But it was too late. She had messed with the wrong passenger, and now the entire plane knew it. Brenda's hands trembled as she held the phone, her face drained of all color. The once confident, dismissive woman was now reduced to a stammering mess. The weight of her mistake was crashing down on her, and for the first time she realized she had no control over the situation. I didn't know," she stuttered, her voice weak and uncertain. She looked around the cabin, hoping for some kind of escape, but there was none. Passengers who had once ignored the confrontation were now watching intently, their expressions shifting from indifference to silent judgment. Some whispered amongst themselves, shaking their heads. Others had already begun recording, their phones discreetly capturing the moment Brenda lost her authority. On the other end of the phone, James Carter remained calm, but his words carried a cold, undeniable weight. "So you only treat people with respect if you know them?" he asked, his voice sharp and direct. "That's what you're telling me?" Brenda swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry. She had no answer. She had built her entire career on the idea that she decided who belonged and who didn't. And now, she was realizing just how wrong she had been. Maya, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke, her voice strong and steady. "You didn't even look at my ticket," she said, holding Brenda's gaze. "You just assumed." Brenda's shoulders slumped as she looked down, her arrogance evaporating under the weight of what she had done. For the first time, she seemed to truly see the damage she had caused. The humiliation she had inflicted on Maya was now her own burden to carry. Passengers exchanged glances, their whispers growing louder. A businessman shook his head, muttering, "Unbelievable." A woman in the back crossed her arms and scoffed. She had no problem being rude before. The cabin had turned against Brenda, and there was no recovering from it. James sighed through the phone, his voice still controlled but firm. "I want the flight manager there. Now." Brenda closed her eyes for a brief second, knowing exactly what that meant. There was no way out of this. Within moments, the senior flight manager, a tall man in a pressed Navy uniform, stepped into the first-class cabin. His expression was neutral, but the authority in his stance was clear. He took one look at Maya, then at Brenda, before nodding. "Miss Mills," he said coolly, "please step aside." Brenda hesitated, her lips parting as if she wanted to argue, but she quickly realized there was nothing left to say. The damage was done. Slowly, she stepped back, her face burning with shame as she walked toward the exit. Passengers watched in silence. Some shook their heads. Others muttered words of approval under their breath. One woman, who had been quietly recording, whispered, "That's what happens when you judge the wrong person." A few rows back, a man let out a low chuckle. "Not so smug now, huh?" Maya remained seated, watching it all unfold with quiet composure. She hadn't needed to raise her voice, hadn't needed to argue. She had simply stood her ground, and the truth had spoken for itself. She had wanted fairness, not revenge, but seeing Brenda finally face the consequences of her actions felt like justice. A different flight attendant, a younger woman with a warm smile, quickly stepped forward and gave Maya a sincere look. "Miss Carter, I sincerely apologize for what happened. Please allow me to escort you back to your seat." Maya nodded, standing tall as she made her way back to 2A, the seat she had rightfully claimed all along. This time, no one questioned her. No one cast judgmental glances her way. Instead, the first-class cabin felt different, heavier with the weight of what had just happened. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Maya pulled out her phone and typed a simple text to her father. "Thanks, Dad. I handled it." Brenda's departure from the plane felt like a shift in the entire atmosphere. The once smug flight attendant had walked off in humiliating silence, her career now hanging by a thread. She had spent years believing she was untouchable, that her power as a gatekeeper in first class gave her the right to decide who belonged. But now, the very people she had dismissed so easily had become the witnesses to her downfall. By the time the plane began taxiing down the runway, the news had already reached the airline's corporate office. Brenda was officially suspended pending investigation. A formal inquiry would review past complaints against her, and there was no doubt that this incident would become a lesson on workplace discrimination. As Maya sat back in her seat, finally at peace, she reflected on everything that had happened. She had always known that people would judge her before they knew her, that assumptions would sometimes be made before she even spoke a word. But what mattered wasn't the assumptions. It was how she responded to them. She had remained calm, composed, and in control of her own narrative. She hadn't let someone else's bias shake her. Instead, she had stood her ground and let the truth speak for itself. Around her, the other passengers seemed different now. Their expressions had changed, and some of them, those who had once looked away in discomfort, were now willing to meet her gaze. A middle-aged woman leaned forward, offering a small but sincere nod. "I just wanted to say," she began softly, "I should have spoken up earlier. That was wrong, and I'm sorry." Maya gave her a gentle smile. "Thank you," she said. Another man, the businessman who had initially raised his eyebrow at her presence in first class, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He cleared his throat. I think a lot of us just assume things sometimes. Today was a wake-up call." Another man, the businessman who had initially raised his eyebrow at her presence in first class, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He cleared his throat. I think a lot of us just assume things sometimes. Today was a wake-up call. Maya didn't respond with anger or bitterness. That wasn't who she was. Instead, she simply replied, "Next time, speak up." The man nodded, looking humbled. "I will." As the flight continued, the crew made it a point to ensure that Maya was comfortable and well taken care of. A different flight attendant came by with a warm smile. "Miss Carter, I'd like to personally apologize for what happened earlier. We're deeply sorry for your experience, and we hope you'll still enjoy the rest of your flight with us." Maya appreciated the sincerity in her voice. She wasn't asking for special treatment. She had only wanted fairness. Still, the airline wasn't taking any chances. The crew quietly arranged for a complimentary meal and VIP service for the remainder of her flight. The pilot himself sent a handwritten note apologizing for the incident, emphasizing that this was not the kind of experience their airline stood for. Maya accepted the gestures but knew that no first-class meal or apology could erase what had happened. What mattered was what would happen next, how people would choose to act moving forward. As the flight neared its destination, she pulled out her phone and drafted a text to her father. "Thanks, Dad, not just for helping me, but for reminding me who I am." She hit send, then leaned back into her seat, looking out the window at the sky stretching endlessly before her. She had walked onto this flight as just another passenger, but she was leaving it as something more. Respect should never be based on assumptions. It should be a given, something every person deserves, regardless of how they look or where they come from. But too often, judgment replaces fairness, and silence replaces action. Would you have spoken up if you were on that flight? Would you have challenged the injustice or looked away like so many others did? Have you ever been judged unfairly? How did you handle it? Share your experiences in the comments. We want to hear your story. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another real-life inspired story. Your voice matters, and together, we can bring more awareness to these important issues. Stay tuned for another eye-opening story next time. You won't want to miss it.